Hi and welcome. We're going to be going over the COVID-19 supplemental payment, the CSP request form that HUD just released earlier this week. This is the finalized version. If you do have the draft version, you will have to replace it and make sure you are using this final version. HUD will not accept any requests that are filled out on the draft form. So you'll want to make sure it'll have this expiration date of May 31st, 2022 for the final version. Now, I do highly suggest if you have not read Housing Notice 2021-05 that you do so prior to filling out this form. It'll help just kind of put some of those missing pieces on what exactly is expected on the request form into place to ensure that you do get approved for your request. Also, HUD came out with tips and explanations for this form, which I do suggest you kind of just briefly review to ensure that so you don't have any issues when you are filling out this form. One of them is to ensure, that you have full functionality of this form, that you're using Adobe Reader, Chrome, or Kofax Power PDF. That is what HUD recommends to ensure that all these text boxes and such work to their full potential and you don't have any frustrations when filling this out. So to start, it's just our basic property information. So we're going to start with our project name. Then if your property has an FHA loan number attached to it, you'll enter this information there as well. And then the assistance contracts number, this is your contract number for your property. The second line, we're going to need a good project management company phone number in case we have any questions or concerns regarding your CSP request submission. Then you're going to select your contract type for the property that you are submitting for. So does this property, is it under a HAP, under a 202 or 811 PRAC? Is it an SPRAC or is it a PAC? And then just like with a good company phone number, we're going to need a good property management company email address. Again, for the same reasons as the phone number, in case we have questions or concerns regarding your submission, we can easily get a hold of somebody to get those questions or concerns answered quickly because HUD does have a tight turnaround for us to submit these requests to them. And then another drop down, you're going to select your CSP operating period for which you're requesting reimbursement for. So with this round, there's a couple of different ways you can do that. If you're simply submitting for this round 4, so for expenses incurred during April 1st of this year to October 31st of this year, you'll just select period 4. Now, one of the options that HUD is allowing during this time is to submit from prior periods if you did not. So if you're doing that, you would then select whatever period you're requesting. Now, if you're requesting for several different periods, yet your request is less than your standard CSP cap amount, you can combine your requests into one form. So that's what these combo periods are for. So if you're requesting for period 1 and period 4, but your amount you're requesting is less than your standard CSP cap, you can combine them here. Now, if you're requesting for various periods, but it exceeds your standard CSP cap, then you would need separate forms for each request period. And that's explained more in the housing notice. And then here, is this request an amendment to a previously approved CSP for the selected operating period? So again, in this round, HUD is allowing you to go back and amend any previous CSP requests you have provided and been reimbursed for. So if you had expenses in operating period 2 that you either forgot to include or are now eligible to include per this Housing Notice 2021-05, you would select yes. Otherwise, it's going to default it to no for you. If you select yes, you're going to have to enter the amount that was previously reimbursed to you for that operating period that you are amending. So then let's look into part 1. So part one, amounts requested for eligible COVID-19 operational expenses. Now this is pretty much exactly how it was on previous rounds if you requested reimbursement during those. The only addition is line 7 here, the air purification equipment and supplies. Again, I highly encourage you to read Housing Notice 2021-05 to see if there are any items or supplies that you would be able to allocate to this line item. So part one is essentially doing a miniature budget. So if you're familiar with budgets, you'll do just fine in this section. As always, CMS is here to help with any questions that you may have. So really, let's just go by this line by line. So payroll costs. So if your property has a janitor or maintenance, so any overtime or additional staff response to COVID-19, you would allocate here in line 1 for 6510. Then line 2 for contract services. So did your property hire someone to deep clean or install barriers possibly in the office or in common areas? Those expenses would be here in the contract services. Now line 3 for payroll costs, administrative functions. These are your overtime or increase of hours for any part-time employees to be able to respond to COVID-19. Now, line 4 is essentially a miscellaneous line item. So anything that didn't quite fit under line 3 for payroll costs, or that doesn't quite fit under line 6 here for office equipment, you would essentially allocate here in contract services, and you'll have to itemize each thing. Now, line 5, cleaning and sanitizing supplies. So these are going to be your things like masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, Clorox wipes. Those would be here in 6515 and 6590. Then line 6, office equipment / IT. So this is essentially, did your property have to purchase webcams for staff to work at home? Did you have to get microphones? Did you have to purchase a Zoom account? Possibly, accounts for Microsoft Teams. Those such expenses would go here in line 6. Now, line 7, the air purification equipment and supplies. This is new for this round. So under part 1, so it's saying not capitalized. So these are things like air filters for an HVAC system, or like if you purchased a portable air purifier for common areas or hallways. That expense could be placed here. And then line 8 is for anything else purchased in response to COVID-19 that is not captured in any of the other line items. And you can always refer to HUD Handbook 4370.2, Chapter 4, Chart of Accounts, for a bit more of a description for each item. So every total that you put in here will auto-calculate. The worksheet will do the work for you into this subtotal here. And you want to follow this. You want to use whole numbers, so round up or down. Use standard rounding applications for your math, and that'll auto-populate for you. Now for the multi-service coordination program expenses. So this is just like previous rounds. So this section will only be filled out if your property has had a HUD-funded service coordinator. So what do I mean by a HUD service coordinator? So eligible service coordinators funding will be in instances where the project has had an increase in service coordinator costs and their service coordinator is included in the operating budget and the owner has reported the service coordinator through the Standards of Success webpage. So again, you will enter amounts here for all the different items for your service coordinator, and it will auto calculate here into subtotal 2. So then it's going to take subtotal 1 and subtotal 2 and auto calculate an amount here for line 13, your category A expenses. Now, part 2 is for amounts requested for eligible capital expenses. So these are the bigger things that you are requesting reimbursement for. And there's some additional new ones under this new housing notice. The big one is for Wi-Fi internet infrastructure and installation costs. So any amount for that would be placed here. If you've done improvements or installed new HVAC systems into your properties to help with COVID-19, that amount would go here. Or any emergency generators and installation costs, that amount would go here. And again, the housing notice is going to go into more detail of what can be allocated for under each of these things. So then it's going to auto-calculate all your totals here. And then it's asking a question. So if you're saying, if you're requesting reimbursement for Wi-Fi internet infrastructure and installation costs, it's going to ask if these have been delivered and installed already. And so it's, obviously yes or no, or it's not applicable. So according to this, your purchases for Wi-Fi, HVAC, or emergency generators, they have to be delivered and installed no later than March 31st, 2022 in order to be eligible for reimbursement for these expenses. So then here on line 18, it's going to take line 13, the subtotal here of all your category A expenses, and anything that you've entered for part 2 for your eligible capital expenses. It's going to add them together and it'll auto-calculate here for you. So then I know I mentioned in the beginning the standard CSP amount. So like in previous rounds, there was that standard cap amount, typically for a tier 1 request. As you've noticed with this, they've broken it out into a category A or category B request. So your standard CSP amount, so you're going to enter the number of assisted units under your contract. So if you have 50 units, you're going to enter 50 units. And then it's going to do an auto calculation for you. So per unit, you get $75. Now, if you are designated as elderly housing, you can enter $1,000 here. And again, look at this housing notice to ensure that you fall under that designation. And then just having a property, you get an automatic $2,500. And then line 23, if you entered anything here into the service coordinator program expenses, it's going to pull that amount down into here. So it'll do the lesser of $1,250 or the amount you put into subtotal 2. And then you'll have your total standard CSP request amount here. So then line 25 is asking, does line 24, your standard CSP amount, exceed line 18? If yes, you're going to have to follow the additional financial need qualifications and documentation requirements. If no, then obviously that would not be applicable. So then part 4, additional justification for requests exceeding the standard CSP amount. So you only need to fill in a justification if your request exceeds your standard CSP cap amount. So line 24. So here you need to have a narrative that should explain how COVID-19 risks at the property justify the higher amounts that you are requesting. So this can include the number of residents reporting infection, any required quarantines, if there was known exposure at the property, community infection rates, local health directives, and you must describe the specific activities you've taken in response to any of those such conditions. Again, you only need to fill out this area if your request exceeds line 24. Then number 27, so a description of capital investments for which reimbursement is requested. So again, this is only required when your total request exceeds your standard CSP amount and your request includes eligible capital expenses. So you're going to have to include a description of the facility improvements made, and that includes a list of any major building components that were replaced or improved. And then if you have any capital expenditures that exceed $25,000, you're going to have to provide evidence that you received 3 written bids for those capital expenditures. And then 28, financial need justification for request exceeding the standard CSP amount. So again, like the other ones, a response is only required for properties that recognize surplus cash at the end of their most recently completed project fiscal year. So you would have to provide an explanation of recent or expected changes in financial position to establish that the property's financial needs are consistent with the requirements in Section 8 of the housing notice. So an example would be presenting evidence of material operating cost increases, so this would be such things as extensive repairs or COVID-19 related costs that are in excess of the previously reported surplus cash or current surplus cash calculation. And then a little thing at the bottom, number 29, have you withdrawn or requested withdrawal of residual receipt balances in 2020 or 2021 for COVID-19 related expenses? This is a drop down, so you'll either select yes or no. If you select yes, you will have to tell HUD how much you withdrew. And then part 5 of the CSP request is your owner's certification and acceptance of terms. So you are certifying all this information is correct and that you are going to keep records per documentation listed in the housing notice. Then the owner will need to print their name, will need owner's signature, and this is you have to follow signature authority rules. So that is something CMS will be checking when we receive the requests to ensure that the proper person signed it. So if the person who signed it does not have signature authority at that property, we will return the request to ensure that the proper person does. And then always ensure they date when they've signed the form. Then part 6 is for HUD use or contract administrator use only. And then at the bottom, they've included a little calculation worksheet. This is optional to complete. You do not have to complete it. And a lot of it will be auto-generated for you. But again, you can add in manual entries as well. So you can kind of see your minimum expected funding level for your request. If you have any questions or concerns regarding this form or need assistance filling it out, definitely do not hesitate to reach out to us. We are more than willing to assist. Our contact information is here on the screen, so you'll be sending your CSP submissions to the vouchers inbox. They will be the ones reviewing and forwarding on to HUD, but you can reach out to myself as well. I am Karen Ventries, the Affordable Housing Trainer, and you can reach us by telephone or email. Thank you so much.